When you go back to geology, though, the Grand Canyon, you look at the Grand Canyon. I've been to the Grand Canyon. Have you? Beautiful, huge, really deep. They claim that this little tiny river carved out that whole thing over millions of years. Because remember, junk scientists will use time to cover up for any lack of, say, evidence or proof. So since this is a ridiculous theory that this little tiny river carved out this big, huge canyon, we're going to just say that it happened over millions of years. Because there was no witnesses, there was no one around to document it, there's no video of it happening, time-lapse video or anything. So, you know, now that we said it took millions of years to happen, you can't prove we're wrong, so we must be right, because we're in control of everything. You see, we run academia, which is a cult. The government only listens to academia, which is a cult, which means that the people in the government are not terribly bright. Because they're listening to a cult instead of to legitimate scientists or doing some research themselves. Among other things wrong with the Colorado River creating the Grand Canyon is that the water would have to run uphill, you see. Now, maybe it did run up, maybe water ran uphill in the past. I can't say that it didn't, but these are the people who adhere to uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism says that since now water only runs downhill, it can't run uphill, it must have been that way since, boom, when nothing became everything. That's what they say. I don't. They say uniformitarianism. So if they say that water could never have run uphill, then how in the world did it carve the Grand Canyon, which would require water to run uphill to do it? I don't know. But they know. They have an answer for you. You know what their answer is? Time. Well, right now we don't have all the answers, but we're going to do more research, and in 100 or 500 or 1,000 years, we're going to have an answer to this question. Of course, we'll be dead, so we can't be held accountable for blatantly lying to you at this particular moment in time, but give it more time, and then and more public funding, of course, and we'll give you an answer later. All right, now go watch Family Guy and forget that you ever asked us, because we're actually not going to do anything, because we're just making this whole thing up in the first place. That's junk science. Grand Canyon carved over millions of years by a teeny weeny little river. All right, there is an alternative theory about it. You know, it's that there was a really big flood about 4,000 years ago. The flood, among other things, created a massive lake that makes the Great Lakes look like ponds up there. And that thing burst, and within probably hours or days, it carved out the Grand Canyon. Now, geologists will say, well, that's ridiculous, that can't happen. Well, if it was right after a flood, guess what? Those rocks are not necessarily hard granite or anything. It is sedimentary rock there, right? So what happened was in the early 1980s when Mount St. Helens blew up in Washington State, blew its top, blew half the mountain apart, guess what we found? Can you guess what we found? It was only 40 years ago. We found that the mudslides and everything built up sedimentary layers that if you showed a photograph of that to a geologist, they would probably say, oh yeah, well clearly this is, 10 million years ago, this is 65 million years ago. It's like, no, this was formed over a couple weeks, actually. Did you watch my Thanksgiving video, how I got to celebrate Thanksgiving here in the great state of Minnesota, who does so much to help the homeless? You would see the snow falling on my window. That was 2.5 hour time-lapse video. And what do you see? You see snow hit this thing and the weight brings it down. More snow hits the top, the weight brings it down. And it just keeps happening over and over. And once in a while something will get too heavy and it'll fall off and something else slides in its place. In 2.5 hours, you get to see what essentially looks like an ice core from Antarctica. Yet, they take these ice cores and they say, well, millions of years ago, see at the bottom of this ice core, this was millions of years ago. You can count the rings like a tree. Really? How many rings, how many layers showed up in that 2.5 hour video? It wasn't millions of years. You see, you can show the obvious to a junk scientist, but they don't care about the truth. If Mount St. Helens could create fairly large canyons, I think one of those canyons was 100 feet deep. And that wasn't a global flood causing it. That was just one volcanic eruption. 100-foot tall layers sedimentary. It also had the beginnings of coal. You know, coal is supposed to take millions of years to form because the dinosaurs died millions of years ago and their bodies became, you know, coal and oil and all this stuff. Whichever theory they have today. Well, the problem is at Mount St. Helens, the trees got sunk under the, you know, the bogs, the water and everything, and they were starting to form the basis of coal. It's pretty obvious it's not going to take that long before you've got coal there. It's not going to take millions of years. Along the lines with ice cores, because ice cores is one of the things that's used to justify this climate change nonsense. Okay, an ice core, you go up to like the ground on Antarctica, you drill down, you know, 200 feet, and you bring the thing up, and it has, you know, or they probably can't go that far, but they bring up this long stick of ice, and they look at it and they claim that the rings in there are layers laid down every year, every season, you know. They don't know that. They don't have the foggiest idea. But they assume it, and if you assume it, then yeah, you can count back and it looks like millions of years ago, maybe. But around the time of World War II, there were some planes that got forced to land in the Arctic up near the North Pole. They ran out of fuel or something. The pilots were rescued, but the planes remained there. A couple decades later, a party went up there to find those planes, which would then be very valuable. These pristine planes in mint condition from World War II era. They went to find them. They knew exactly where the planes were, but they weren't there. So they thought, well, they must have got buried by snow. So they started digging, and they found the planes. I believe 250 feet below where they were standing. Now, according to these geologists and these climate change people, it would take millions of years to dump 250 feet of snow and ice on top of these planes. So unless the dinosaurs were flying around in World War II era planes, it's a reasonable assumption that the planes they found down there were the ones from World War II. And that their entire theory of what an ice core has in it is completely wrong. So why do they keep using it to justify climate change? Maybe because they're junk scientists and the truth just doesn't matter to them. They want power, wealth, prestige, public funding. They don't want to do productive work for a living. They're lazy bums. And they want to dictate the terms of other people's existences at a safe distance where they can never be held accountable by the people they're hurting. That's climate change for you. Another one to look up, again, I'm sorry, I wish I had time to go over all of these. Redshift. Look up Redshift, one word. Redshift is like a visual Doppler effect. You know, when a police car goes by, and the pitch drops as it passes by. That's because when it's coming at you, it's compressing the waves, and a more compressed waveform is higher pitched. And when it goes past you, it's being stretched out, right? And when it's stretched out, that's a lower pitch. Well, redshift is when you look at a galaxy, or in this case like a quasar, and you see the same thing only in the light spectrum instead of in the sound. And they make an assumption that that means that they can tell whether it's moving toward us or away from us, and they can tell how fast it's going. And from that they derive some of their evidence for the Big Bang. You know, nothing going boom and becoming everything. The problem is, there is an alternative theory of what redshift really is, and gee, what do you know? I mean, whoever thought of such a thing? The actual evidence in this world that we live in supports the alternative theory, not the one that I was taught as a child, not the one that I paid thousands of dollars for college professors to teach me, even though it was nothing more than an assumption in the first place, and they never really bothered to tell me that, did they? Look up redshift, look up the controversy there. Remember, anytime you look up controversy, when you put it in Google, the first 50 pages are going to be people who control the agenda. You've got to hunt around, and you also have to find the nut job conspiracy people who insert nonsense in there. Or sometimes you get the scientists, the academia, and they deliberately create these fake conspiracy theories so that when you go look for the real truth, you think that anyone who opposes them is just a whack job. It takes a lot of research to find the legitimate stuff. Another thing would be comets. All right, from the time I was a kid, told a comet is a dirty snowball. Comes around, gets close to the sun heats it up, and all that snow melts off, and that's what creates the tail that you see. Well, that sounds great. Kind of. Problem is, we're in a different era now. Just like DNA completely set fire to evolution, but they won't admit it. They've sent probes to comets. They sent probes, one that crashed into a comet. They have photographs taken from from as close to a comet as I am to that store over there. Right? And they're not dirty snowballs. They're asteroids. They're just rocks, just like an asteroid. They're no different. So what is it exactly that's melting off and causing that big long tail that you see? If there's no snow there, what is it that's melting off? Well, the scientists the people who call themselves scientists, they will not admit that they're wrong. They will not admit that they've been lying to you. They will not admit that they were lying to your parents and that they were lying to your grandparents on this one. Comets are dirty snowballs. They will not admit it because they don't care about the truth. Even when they send their own probes there and they send back photographs of a rock. Because if you go and search comet photos online and Google again, the photos that come up are going to be artist conceptions from before the probe came to the comet. And guess what the artist conceived of? A dirty snowball. But these are some pretty good artists. You can't tell really the difference between an artist conception and a real photograph taken by a spacecraft, can you? You've got to hunt for the real photographs where you will see a dry rock. See, there's a theory that what that is, the tail is not snow melting off, it's plasma, superheated gases. And guess what? That actually makes sense, and there's evidence supporting that idea. But that completely rewrites all of planetary physics. It means that everything they've been teaching us for the last 100 years is completely wrong, just fundamentally from the bottom up. For example, we've been taught that the sun is a nuclear furnace. It's just a whole bunch of hydrogen bombs going up. Boom, 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 boom. Every second, 1 million hydrogen bombs go off. And if you've thought about it at all, like me, it's one of the things in Isaac Asimov's books, I would go, this doesn't make any sense. If everything's billions of years old, wouldn't you think all those bombs would have went off by now? I mean, how long does it take for, if you got 1 million hydrogen bombs going off every second? I mean, the sun is big. It's, 1 million times bigger than the Earth, but it's not that big. If that was a nuclear furnace, the sun should have exhausted all its fuel millions of years ago. The plasma theory says something else. The plasma theory says that the sun is more like a light bulb, that it isn't nuclear processes that are causing the high energy from the sun. It's more like rubbing a balloon on your hair. You get static electricity. If you do it in a dark room, you see all the sparks and everything. Well, what if you have a balloon the size of the sun and space itself has the characteristics of your hair, and the sun's moving through that, not this fast, but at, say, I don't know, 500,000 miles per second, for example? That would generate a lot of static, wouldn't it? Might even generate as much as you see in the sun. Go figure. That's completely, fundamentally different than everything that they're teaching people. And guess what? The evidence is on the side of plasma physics, not what they've been telling people for 100 years, not what they've been charging people in college, thousands and thousands of dollars, where they take out student loans to pay to be taught those lies. Look at Existential Threat number 5, student loan racketeering industry. Wow, I wish I had more time to go into comets and what happened with Pluto when the probe went out there. I just don't have time. There's too much else. I will say this, though. If comets are dirty snowballs, not only, they say that, gets close to the sun, it heats up, the snow melts, and it becomes the tail. Now, of course, the tail is always pointing away from the sun, so as the comet goes by here, you don't have this trail of stuff coming off the comet. You would expect, just like anything else, if you're losing debris behind you, it should go behind you, but it doesn't. Instead, the debris trail is always away from the sun. So by the time when the comet gets on the other side of the sun, the tail is in front of it. It's moving toward the tail. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense if it's just stuff melting off of it, right? But if you get into plasma, if you get into other forces at work in this universe, the solar wind would push that debris away from the sun no matter where the comet is. If the comet's here, it's pointed, then the debris is going that way. If the comet's here, it's going that way. It's always going away from the sun. And that's exactly what we see. But they will not admit this, will they? And if you send your kid to college and you pay $20,000 a year or $10,000 a year, they're going to be taught that comets are a dirty snowball. Are you going to ask for your money back? Are you going to hold them accountable? Or are you just going to sit back and take it? Because that's just one of thousands of examples of junk science that we have to deal with. If a comet is a dirty snowball and it's been around for millions and billions of years, don't you think at some point it would have melted, maybe? The sun's pretty hot. Have you ever gotten sunburn? You're 93 million miles away from the sun. Some of these comets come up within a couple thousand miles of the sun. You'd think it would melt. Well, guess what? Junk scientists have an answer. Now, I'm going to let you guess. Do you think that the answer they have was based on research and evidence, repeated experiments giving exactly the same results, published and reviewed by critics who are looking for problems with the science before they came to this conclusion? Do you think that that's where their answer came from? Or do you think that their answer was just a story that they made up off the top of their head? I'll just let you mull that over for a second and see what you think, which one it might be. They came up with a story. See, what they did was they said, well, we can't be wrong. We're PhDs. We've got huge brains, which is probably a metaphor for something else, but why bother going there? That's like talking about people driving a pickup truck at this point. They've got really big brains, right? We can't be wrong. We've got a PhD. I won a Nobel Prize. I got a Pulitzer Prize. I can't be wrong. Look at my degrees. Look at my degrees. Look at the bones, right? That's what they would say. So since they can't be wrong, they have to come up with some explanation for why what they're telling us is true, makes no rational sense, and doesn't fit in with anything that we observe. So they came up with this idea of an Oort cloud, which sounds a lot like dark matter and dark energy, right? The universe, for their equations to even come close to having any hope of working, then they're missing like 98% of the mass of the universe. So they just say, well, it's out there, we just can't see it or detect it. We'll call it dark energy and dark matter. You know, just trust us that it's there because we have really big brains. We have PhDs. You know, we can't detect it, but it's there. You know, 98% of the universe is there. Trust us, it's there somewhere. You know, eventually, 1,000 years from now, we'll find it. We'll prove it after we're dead, and we can't be held accountable for lying to you. But it's there. Trust us. See, they come up with whatever idea seems to save their plan because they don't care about the truth. Well, with comets, they came up with the Oort cloud. So they said, well, there's this cloud, there's this shell of comets, or, you know, dirty snowballs, just the sphere. Kind of goes back to the spheres. Remember the epicycles? Way back when they were building these ridiculous spheres and epicycles, they would just make something up off the top of their head and say, well, you know, the reason that Jupiter seems to go backwards is because it's on this, you know, got a handle and a T-bar, and then there's this rotating cuff, and they make this Swiss watch thing. They just make up a story. Turns out, no, Jupiter just goes around the sun, you see, instead of everything going around the Earth. It's that simple. That's all it was. Well, the Oort cloud, they came up with, I can't believe they did this. This is like 2,000 years later, they come up with the same stupid answer they did in the Stone Age, right? There's a sphere out there full of comets, and every time one burns up going by the sun, it melts away, this Oort cloud just shoots another one out. And you got a replacement comet. And it's such a big Oort cloud that it's lasted millions and billions of years. Of course, we can't see the Oort cloud. We can't detect it. We can't prove in any way, shape, or form that this thing even exists. But we've got really big brains. We've got PhDs. So you got to just trust us on this one. And then they came up with another one, the Kuiper belt, which is one that's closer. It's more like around where Pluto is, to supposedly explain short-term comets. The Oort cloud is supposed to explain long-term comets. And of course, they have found some things out there around the range of Pluto. Of course, they seem to be rocks, but hey, who's counting? That's not surprising. Okay, we only found Pluto because we finally developed the technology that allowed us to find Pluto. There was never anything that didn't say there's more stuff past Pluto. Of course there probably was. There might even be stuff that's between us and Pluto that we haven't discovered yet. There could be. Alright, big deal. That doesn't mean there's a Kuiper belt. That doesn't mean there's this sphere of just billions and billions of things that keep shooting in to replace comets that melt away. It's just lunacy. Look up the Pioneer Anomaly. Pioneer was one of the first spacecraft sent out to explore other planets. A bit of a problem with its motion, shall we say. The people who call themselves scientists, if you believe their theories, the spacecraft should not be moving the way that it is. Look that one up. Pioneer Anomaly. I'll leave that one for you. How about when it's been demonstrated and proven, despite their best efforts to hide it, when these junk scientists are proven to be frauds, or proven to be wrong, or proven to be just plain gullible? Piltdown Man, back in the early 1900s, they discovered the missing link. How about that? You know, of course, there should, according to Darwin, there should be hundreds of thousands of transitory fossils, all different, but they found one thing, a skull, part of a skull, and they call it a missing link between man and monkey, and that proves evolution. And all the big scientists with their tuxedos, they came out. This was in England, so they're all blah 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 blah, sir, lord, blah 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 blah, you know, which is their way of saying I have a PhD, I've got a big head, you know, whatever, I've got a big brain, look at my awards, look at my degrees. There's a consensus among my peers that I'm a scientist. Of course I'm a scientist. So all these big brain people came out and they did their quick investigation and they said, yep, it's legit. Piltdown Man is the missing link. Problem solved. Evolution is the way it is. You can just give God his bags and send him packing. He doesn't exist. We proved it. Of course, it didn't take too many years after that before it was shown that it was a complete fraud. It was a complete hoax. Some wise guy took like a monkey in a pig jaw or something. I don't know. They took two completely different animals, put them together. They put the teeth, stained them with coffee or tea or something, put them in an oven to make it look old. They buried it in a place where they knew this guy was digging for archaeology, knowing that he would find it. And of course, when he found it, they took off. Oh, it must have been there for millions and millions of years. Even though some prankster had buried it there maybe a couple weeks earlier. That's how good these scientists are, folks. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you something different. I really do. I would like to live in a world where people are more competent than that. But that's what we've got. And it's not good. Another one would be, remember what I talked about with peer review. How peer review in so many cases is just a rubber stamp. You know, because if I challenge you too much, I might lose my status as one of your peers. Remember the high school cliques? I talked about this in a previous video. It's no different. The high school popular clique operates the same way this so-called peer review system does, for the most part. There are exceptions. I don't want to paint too broad of a brush there, but when it comes to junk science, yeah, it's the same thing. Anti-smoking? You'll see that one in a moment. Several years ago, they came up with a computer program, I think at MIT, and they put it online. It's just a computer program that creates academic journal articles. It just randomly creates them. It takes a bunch of big, high and mighty sounding words and strings them together. It doesn't even make sense. It's just gibberish. I mean, I can't even make it up. It's so completely foreign to the English language. You just take a bunch of big words, you string them together, you use a small amount of artificial intelligence to maybe put, you know, and is and things in there. And it even creates charts and graphs, you know, and it'll, you know, have like, on this end it'll color blue, and on this side, you know, number of CDs owned when I was 13 years old or something like that. I mean, just nothing to do with anything scientific. Just completely made up out of thin air by a computer. And some people got the brilliant idea to send these articles that were written by the computer in to journals, and some of them got published. That's how good your peer review process is. That's how good your journal articles are. Your scientific journals. Along those lines, I might as well skip ahead to something about that. In anti-smoking, probably the most prominent journal is called... Are you ready for this? The journal is called... let me see. What do you think... What do you think the journal's called? Do you think it's called the Journal of Research on Smoking and Health? Or do you think it's called Tobacco Control? Or do you think it's called... I can't even remember all the big pretentious words they use in these things. Well, just those two. Do you think it's the Journal of Research on Smoking and Health, or do you think it's called Tobacco Control? It's called Tobacco Control. You see, a journal that's called Research on Smoking and Health kind of implies that maybe they're researching whether and how there might be some relationship between smoking and health. But a journal called Tobacco Control kind of tells you what it's about from the beginning, doesn't it? It assumes that there's a problem that needs to be controlled. I mean, right there in the title of the journal. What do you think are the odds that a journal called Tobacco Control is going to publish the best conducted, most long-term, with the best data ever in all of history, predictive, without fail, gets through peer review, gets through critic review? Nothing wrong with this. It absolutely positively shows that tobacco does not need to be controlled. What do you think the odds are that Tobacco Control Journal is going to publish that article, even though this article is absolutely ironclad by any standard? Remember, the journal's called Tobacco Control. You see, they don't care about determining whether or not smoking is dangerous. They want to control tobacco. And here's another thing. In all the time these anti-smokers have been around, they have never once, that I'm aware of, I could be wrong, there's some really insane people in that movement, so it's possible this has happened, but I'm not aware of it. They might have taken a tobacco leaf, put it in a tiny little jail cell that they built with bars and everything, a little lock, and lock it, and throw away the key, and sit outside the bars and taunt that leaf. Ha! What you gonna do now, leaf? Huh? What you gonna do? Who you gonna hurt now? I got you in jail. I'm controlling you. What are you going to do about it, huh, Leaf? What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Again, there's some lunatics in that movement. I mean, some really bona fide, scary... I'll leave it at that for now. I've dealt with these people for 30 years. You don't know how much insanity is in that movement. But I'm not aware of that ever happening, you see, because they never control tobacco, ever! They don't do it! They control human beings. They control people who grow tobacco, who manufacture cigarettes and cigars. They control people who use tobacco, people who sell tobacco. But they call their journal Tobacco Control. Isn't that interesting? So first of all, tobacco control has nothing to do with science, has nothing to do with researching whether tobacco is dangerous or needs to be controlled, and then they never actually control tobacco anyway. They're controlling human beings. They're not taxing a tobacco leaf. They're taxing human beings who work to earn that money. And they're going up with the gun, the loaded gun from the government, and taking away their money. Remember, a pack of cigarettes should cost probably between $1 and $2 today. It costs $9, $10, $11. Where's all that other money going? They're stealing. What are the odds that a journal called Race Control is going to publish an article that seems to indicate that maybe Jews are just like everybody else? Maybe blacks are perfectly equal to whites. What do you think are the odds that that particular journal is going to publish it? It's called Race Control. What do you think are the odds? The odds are the same as the odds of Tobacco Control publishing any kind of legitimate study that even hints that tobacco does not need to be controlled. They put it right in front of your eyes, folks. I mean, it's right there. when they take these journal articles as evidence and they go up to legislators and they say, we need a smoking ban, we need to increase taxes, and you've got to give some of those taxes to us, we'll kick some of it back to you as a campaign contribution. When they do that, you would think even the dumbest legislator, you'd think even a Minnesota legislature would go, well, but you're quoting a journal that's called Tobacco Control. Doesn't that kind of mean that you're assuming that tobacco is dangerous from the beginning, that it needs to be controlled? Where's the objective research? Apparently they're not doing that because there's smoking bans everywhere and everyone's taxed into oblivion, right? I'm just waiting for the journal called Control of the Masses, because they're going to be that upfront about it. I already talked to you about vaccines. Look at the vaccine thing. Why is there so much backlash? If people who are against vaccines are that wacky and crazy, then why are these people who call themselves scientists so berserk about it? They're the ones who have the big government's gun forcing people. They're moving toward that, forcing people at gunpoint ultimately to get a vaccine shot. So why are they worried about these people? It's almost like they're worried that these people are going to say something that other people would change their mind if they heard. Well, if they're just a bunch of whack jobs, that's not going to happen. Maybe these people have something truthful to say. Maybe they have something truthful to say about what vaccines are and what the danger is of those. Then I could see people who call themselves scientists aggressively fighting against anyone who challenges the validity of vaccines. People, please think. You were given this beautiful gift between your ears. Use that gift. Look into the problem with vaccines. There's so much here, and look at that. I'm over an hour already. What can I do? What can I do? There's so much more. I'm gonna give you 2 more things and leave it at that. All right. First one. National Public Radio, which is one of the biggest propagators of junk science, one of the biggest builder-uppers of junk scientists. Remember, at the end of every time they have someone on there, at the end, they read their credentials. Goes back to the last video, credential worship. Okay, forget what they've got. Tell me what awards they have, what degrees they have, what chair they hold. You know, I hold this chair. I'm the senior fellow of holding the, the chair of this car. Doesn't impress anybody, but if you say I'm the senior fellow and professor emeritus blah 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 at this university blah blah blah, sounds pretty impressive, even if academia is a cult that engages in junk science. You see, if you see how that works. Well, one of the most influential anti-smoking leaders throughout the late 80s, 90s and such, he was on NPR fairly often, in the media all the time. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. When he was on NPR, at the end of the interview, they would say, so-and-so is professor of medicine at such and such university. Okay? So it doesn't matter what their name is, doesn't matter what university, the key is professor of medicine. Okay? Sounds pretty impressive, doesn't it? Now, if NPR actually cared about the truth, they probably would have told you the truth instead. Now, in a way they did, because guess what? This guy does have the title Professor of Medicine. He does. The problem is, what he actually went to school to study wasn't medicine. It was mechanical engineering. See, it's a mechanical engineer who hates tobacco. And if you remember my example about the tobacco leaf in a prison cell, it ain't tobacco that's hated, it's people associated with tobacco that is hated. Eugenics, genocide, Hitler. Do you see again how all these things overlap? His degree was in mechanical engineering, but his anti-smoking efforts brought so many millions of dollars into that university that they gave him an honorary title, Professor of Medicine. And guess what? With that honorary title, he can go up and put it on his CV. They can go on NPR and they can truthfully say, so-and-so is Professor of Medicine at such and such university. They're telling the truth, but they're not telling the whole truth. And they're not telling nothing but the truth. They're not saying so-and-so holds the honorary title of professor of medicine and a degree in mechanical engineering. They don't say that. That's NPR for you, and that's anti-smoking for you. The last thing I have to say here, oh man, there's so much more, there's so much more. All right, 2 more things. Wikipedia. Remember when Dave Hitt, he tried to insert just a small amount of truth into the smoking and health page on Wikipedia. He had it documented, cited, had all the absolute proof of what he was saying was true. He tried to insert it, and within minutes they had dumped it. They got rid of it because it didn't fit their agenda. It told the truth. Well, here's another example. Michael Swade, another guy who does some really interesting stuff. On the page for magnetic reconnection. Magnetic reconnection is like the Oort cloud or vestigial organs. It's another one of these things where they just make something up off the top of their head and then they look for proof of it because they need it to exist to support their theories, right? So, magnetic reconnection. Michael Swade went into the Wikipedia page for that. He tried to insert some truth. All right, and the funny thing here is that the articles that he cited were written by the very people who maintain the page on magnetic reconnection. See, they themselves, in their own research, were contradicting this thing. The problem was, they needed magnetic reconnection to work to support their theory. Well, Big Bang doesn't have any evidence because, we're lacking 98% of the mass that should be there if that were true, so we're just going to assume it's there and call it dark matter, even though we can't find it, can't see it, can't detect it. That's what magnetic reconnection was in a different field, right? Swade also, I believe he quoted criticism from Hannes Alfvén, and he is the father of magnetohydrodynamics field, right? So if you have Einstein's the father of relativity, Newton could be called the father of mechanics, then Hannes Alfvén would be the founder of magnetohydrodynamics. Well, it's hard to get. If you had Einstein giving a criticism, a well-educated, well-stated criticism of even quantum mechanics, you would think that would at least be in there in a criticism section. Well, that's what he tried to do, and guess what? Immediately, these guys crawled out of the woodwork from NASA and Jet Propulsion Laboratory, by the way, your government at work, and they said, we can't have criticism here. We have big brains. We have PhDs. We know we're right. We can't have criticism in here. That needs to go. There's another example of Wikipedia giving you absolute garbage on any controversial topic. Now we get to the last one. Now I'm going to show you just one example of the human cost. I've already actually shown you others. All those countless, probably thousands of women who died just in that local area in that century from childbirth when they didn't have to, because doctors had too much of an ego to just simply wash their hands when they were told that that would solve the problem. They had the big brains. They had all the answers. Remember in the last video I said junk scientists, one way to identify them is they will aggressively go after people who challenge them, even if those people are right. But it doesn't really matter if they're right or not. Just being challenged does not justify you absolutely destroying the life of your opponent. That's not what a scientist does. That's what a cult member does. There was an educator, I believe he was a high school teacher, named Kent Hovind. Maybe 20 years ago till 10 years ago, he was so disturbed by the way that all of these textbooks just came out and stated evolution and Big Bang as fact, when if you know anything about it for real, if you've really spent a long time researching it, like my whole life kind of thing, you know that it's garbage. You know that it is, and you know why it is. He was so upset about it, he started kind of going on lecture circuit to churches. He's a Christian, and he would go to churches and speak to young people, and he came up with this wonderful presentation that shows you a lot of what I just talked about and so much more. Look up his presentations on YouTube. His name is Kent Hovind, and he has a great sense of humor. He's just a heck of a nice guy. And he was making such an impact. He was reaching so many people with things that are just absolutely obvious. Like the idea, the comet, dirty snowball. Well, if it goes by the sun for 1,000,000 years, wouldn't it melt at some point? Just simple things like that. He just had hundreds of these things in his presentation. And as you watch it, you start to realize, you know what? That doesn't what these scientists are saying makes absolutely no sense at all. I never thought of it. I never bothered to think about what they were telling me. He was having such an impact just as a lecturer. He didn't have a TV show or reaching millions of people. They hated this guy so much with the fervor of a cult, not a scientist, but a cult. They went after him with a vengeance. And here's what happened. Since they had nothing on him, they used anti-drug laws, which were drawn up to be so generic that they could be applied for any kind of oppression. Specifically, there's a drug law called structuring. What that means is that if you have a bank account and you have, say, $10,000 in there, if you take out more than $5,000 without declaring it properly to the government, or if you put in more than $5,000 without declaring it properly, the government assumes that you are dealing drugs, and it will prosecute you and throw you in prison because you took a certain amount of your own money out of your own bank account, and the government just arbitrarily deemed this random number to be too much. Well, Kent Hovind was looking at building like a theme park to help explain all this stuff about dinosaurs and the flood, Big Bang evolution, the nonsense there. So he had a lot of money in here, right? In his organization for that. Now, at some point, I can't remember what he was doing, but he had to do some kind of building improvement, or he was building it was for construction, right? So he went to the bank, he took out more than $5,000. I don't know how much, maybe 5,010 or something. Now, these crazy lunatics in these cults, like anti-smoking, they have people planted everywhere. Every division of government, within the military, within the IRS, well, it's not government, but they have it within the Justice Department, the FBI. They have these whack jobs planted everywhere. So if they target somebody, these guys can start using their tools. They just sneak in at night and go over to the computer, and it's like, Kent Hovind. Oh my gosh, he took out $5,010 from his bank account last week, and he didn't fill out the paperwork. Got him. A SWAT team descended on this guy's home. As far as I know, they kicked in the door, put the guns up to the family's heads, dragged him and his wife out in their night clothes, took him to jail. Kent Hovind went to prison for 10 years. Nothing to do with drugs. No one ever even implied that he had anything to do with drugs. That's not the law he broke. The law he broke was that one of the drug laws says you cannot take this much money out of your own bank account unless you declare it in such and such a way, which is something that nobody even knows, right? So people do that all the time. Because it doesn't make any rational sense that you would think, oh, gee, I need to fill out paperwork. I just took money out of my own bank account. Who's going to think of that? But you know what? The other people who do it, like you, if you take out $6,000 from your bank account, if you haven't offended anybody, if you haven't threatened a cult like this, there's nobody checking your name to see if you did it, to see if they can use it against you. But Kent Hovind had enemies because he was telling the truth. He went to prison for 10 years. He only got out a few years ago. I've spoken to the man. I have nothing but the highest respect for him. This is a political imprisonment of the highest order. This is Soviet Union style. Not even style. It is exactly what would be done in the Soviet Union. And it was done completely off the radar. They never put it in the media or anything. And just as an aside, you may or may not be interested to know, the prosecutor, the one who fought so aggressively to get this guy away from kids, so that Kent Hovind could not teach kids the truth about junk science, that prosecutor later got arrested for child molestation. He was having fun with little boys, you see. And I think he got less time in prison than Kent Hovind did. I'm not sure about that, though. You'll have to check. Do scientists go after someone like that to destroy their lives, destroy their families? I mean, it destroyed his family. It put a rift between him and his son. He and his wife ended up getting divorced. They're Christian. I mean, this woman who hadn't done anything wrong wakes up to a SWAT team holding guns on them, drags them out of their own home at night in their night clothes. The humiliation, I mean, absolutely destroyed their lives. And to Kent Hovind's credit, He went on, as soon as he got out of prison, he went right back to it. God bless the man. An American hero who you've probably never heard of. Look him up, look up what happened to him, and you're going to find on the net, you're going to find all these people calling him names, accusing him of doing this and that and the other thing. Just like I said in the last video, that's what junk scientists do. They resort to name-calling, innuendo, trying to ruin your reputation. Oh, you don't have any credentials, you don't have a PhD, blah, 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 blah. As much as I want to go on and on and on and on, because this is just a small sample of literally thousands of examples of junk science and the consequences. But I've got to stop at some point and move on to the 7th existential threat to the United States of America. I put a lot of time and a lot of effort into this one particular threat, junk science. I could have put that much into really any of them, especially cults and student loan racketeering. But junk science in particular is so pervasive, and it affects our lives so much without us knowing it. And we believe, not we, I will never include myself amongst the people who believe these clowns. The people out there believe these junk scientists without any question whatsoever, and they're being led like sheep to the slaughter. All the things we've lost because of them. Real energy solutions instead of coal, nuclear, oil. Could have had it. Pfft, junk scientists made sure it wouldn't happen. Cure for cancer? Pfft, gone. Not going to happen. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe even the ability to grow back our teeth as adults if they get too bad. You can't even... The medical profession is the deadliest profession throughout all of history, outside of warfare, genocide, blatant tyranny, etc. I can only hope and pray that these videos on junk science have opened your eyes to something. Go out and study it for yourself. I will try my best to provide links in the description here to help take you a little further. But remember, no matter what you see, whether it seems to support what I'm saying, whether it seems to support what junk scientists say, that's not enough. If you want the real truth, you have to go search it, and you have to search, you have to dust for prints, you have to look under the rug, you have to turn on the lights, turn off the lights, bring in an ultraviolet light. You can't take anything at face value, not even what I say. You need to do the research. And if you don't want to spend the rest of your life researching all of these things, then find one that's interesting to you and devote yourself to that. A little bit at a time. And over the course of maybe 3 months or 6 months, as you delve in more and more and you start getting journal articles and reading them, and you start researching who these people are and where their money comes from, once you start following the money trail, you look at what university they're at, and you look at what kind of interest do they have in Africa, for example. If this university is pushing vaccines, what is their relationship to Africa, where there's a major scam going on? Start researching all of these things. Just on one topic that interests you, I can almost promise you that the truth you're going to find is different than what you've been told. And not to turn this into a religious video, but the truth really will set you free. It'll set you free from the tyranny of the mind that these junk scientists, the kind of job they've done on you. I thank you so much for watching all these junk science videos. And again, my deepest apologies that I couldn't just spend hour after hour after hour after hour explaining all of this to you. You take care, and thanks so much for watching.